Remember just a couple of years ago? It felt like the metaverse was the next big thing. It was pitched as this brand new digital universe that was going to completely change how we live, work, and play. So, whatever happened to it? And that's really the big question we're tackling here. Because if you think back, and it wasn't that long ago, this topic was absolutely everywhere. It was in every headline, at every tech conference. You couldn't escape it. It really felt like we were standing on the edge of the next great internet revolution. And to get a sense of just how massive this bet was, just look at this number, $70 billion. That's what just one company, Meta, poured into its Metaverse division. An absolutely mind-blowing amount of money. It was a financial moonshot that basically forced the metaverse into the center of the tech universe. So let's start right there with that promised future. I mean, the vision they sold us was incredibly ambitious and, pretty compelling. A persistent, immersive virtual space where literally anything was possible. What's so wild is just how fast this all happened. The timeline was just dizzying. Back in 2021, we hit peak hype. It was all anyone could talk about. But by 2022, things were already starting to cool down. The conversation began to shift, the big money started to pull back. And today, well, the picture is radically different. And this quote from Mark Zuckerberg in 2021, wow, it just says it all. The next 10 years will be defined by the metaverse. I mean, he wasn't just talking about some niche product. He was claiming the future itself. And that one statement basically opened the floodgates for a frantic multi-billion-dollar investment race. Which brings us to the heart of our story, the great disappointment. With all that cash, all that brainpower, and all that ambition, what went wrong? Why did this grand vision just fall so spectacularly short of the hype? Well, when you start digging, it really boils down to a few key problems. For starters, the hardware. The VR headsets were just clunky, they were expensive, and honestly, a little isolating. That was a huge barrier for most people. Then there was just no good reason to use it. Why would you meet up in some glitchy virtual world when Zoom or FaceTime just worked better? On top of that, you had these walled gardens. Every company was building its own little universe that couldn't connect to any of the others. And maybe the biggest killer of them all, the expectations were just completely blown out of proportion. And this is where you really see that huge disconnect. The promise versus the reality is just demolishing. The promise was for hundreds of millions of people hanging out every single day. The reality? Really niche adoption, with flagship platforms that felt pretty much empty. The promise was a booming new virtual economy. The reality? A total collapse of those virtual assets and the NFTs that were supposed to power it all. So what happened? Well, the tech industry did what it does best. It pivoted hard. All that investment money, all that attention, it's like a river that just changed its course almost overnight. Why? Because while the metaverse was offering this fuzzy, far-off promise, artificial intelligence was offering something tangible, something powerful, right now. The industry followed the immediate value, and the metaverse got left in the dust. But, we can't really get the full picture here without talking about the financial mania that blew up alongside it. Because this wasn't just a technological dream. It fueled this massive speculative bubble, especially around a craze called play to earn. Now, the concept of play to earn, or P2E, was simple and really, really tempting. The idea was that you could earn actual money in crypto or NFTs just by playing a video game. As you can probably guess, that promise kicked off a speculative fever that was just unlike almost anything we'd seen before. And the results of that fever, well, the numbers speak for themselves. They're just brutal. Tokens from the biggest names in the game, Axie Infinity, The Sandbox, Decentraland, they crashed by 94, 96, even 97% from their peak. It was an absolute wipeout. The second the speculators bailed, the whole economic model just came crashing down. The lesson here is crystal clear, isn't it? Speculation just can't be the foundation. You can blow up a balloon with all the hype in the world, but if there's nothing solid inside, it's going to pop. Real, lasting value has to come from actually being useful. But here's the real twist in the story. This doesn't mean the metaverse is dead. Not even close. It's actually a story of survival, of adaptation. The idea found its footing, just not where anyone expected it to. The answer lies in what you might call accidental metaverses. So, we're talking about platforms that were often around way before the hype, places that never even used the label Metaverse, but are the ones that actually succeeded. Video games like Roblox and Fortnite are, for all intents and purposes, functioning metaverses with millions of engaged users. Then you've got super practical things like corporate training simulations and virtual events, stuff that actually solves a real problem. Even smaller creative projects, like a Dracula tourism game in Romania, have found a passionate audience. It turns out the value was always in the utility, not the buzzword. So where does all of this leave us? Well, it leaves us looking at a much more grounded, much more realistic future. This isn't really a story of failure, it's a story of maturation. It's about a concept that went through a wild, hype-fueled fever dream and came out the other side a lot smarter. And this is the most important thing to take away. The metaverse hasn't disappeared. It's just being recalibrated. It shed that grand escapist fantasy, and what's left behind is turning out to be something a lot more interesting and, frankly, a lot more useful. And you can see these trends shaping that new future right now. The mix of AI and VR is creating these incredibly realistic training simulations for pilots and surgeons. Then there's the concept of digital twins. This is fascinating, where you create an exact virtual copy of a factory or even a city to run tests and make things better without any real-world risk. And of course, hybrid events that blend the physical and virtual are already becoming the norm. The focus has totally shifted from fantasy to function. And that brings us to one last big question that I think kind of reframes this whole journey. What if the real future of this technology was never about building some parallel universe to escape to? What if it was always about creating a powerful set of tools to help us understand, augment, and ultimately improve our real world? Maybe that initial vision was the mistake all along. Now that is an idea worth thinking about.